Things between my wife, Carol, her mom, Eleanor, and me have been getting worse and worse over the years. It's not one big blow-up, but more like a slow, constant tension that just wears you down. Now, it's gotten to the point where I'm not sure what to do next. The heart of the problem is Eleanor's overwhelming sense of entitlement and the fact that Carol just can't seem to stand up to her or even see it for what it is. To give you some context, I met Carol about 6 years ago at a work event through a mutual friend. Right from the start, she was upfront about her family's financial past, which I respected. She told me her family used to be really wealthy. They lived in a massive house in a fancy neighborhood, had several expensive cars, and a lifestyle that was hard for me to even picture. But, according to Carol, a string of bad investments and poor money choices wiped almost everything out. She described her parents, Eleanor and Richard, as having a habit of living beyond their means, buying boats, sports cars, and taking out loans they couldn't pay back. Eventually, they had to sell their big house and move into a much smaller place. Even with all that, Carol always defended her parents, saying they did their best and gave her everything she needed. But the more she shared about her childhood, the harder it was for me to feel sorry for her parents. One story in particular stood out to me: her 17th birthday. Carol had gotten a decent amount of cash as gifts from family, but Eleanor basically pressured her into giving it all up. She guilted Carol, saying she needed the money more because Carol didn't understand how hard it was to manage a household. Later, Carol found out her mom had used that money to get a fancy perm. When Carol, rightly upset, confronted her, Eleanor's response was cold and shocking. She basically said that because she'd provided Carol with food, shelter, and clothes her whole life, she deserved that money. It was a really messed up moment that says a lot about their relationship. Carol's dad, Richard, was in a lot of ways even worse than Eleanor. He had a child with someone else while married to Eleanor and was legally required to pay child support. But instead of handling it himself, when Carol got her first job, he started pressuring her to help cover those payments. He'd constantly guilt her, saying he couldn't afford it and that she needed to step up for the family. On top of that, he'd regularly ask Carol to buy things for their condo, like a bigger TV or a fancy new refrigerator, even though the ones they had worked just fine. If Carol ever pushed back or even hesitated, Richard would get aggressive. He'd threaten to destroy her phone, her laptop, basically the few things she actually owned. Carol told me these stories with a kind of numb sadness, like she just accepted this as how things were. It wasn't until she moved out of her parents' place and got her own small apartment that she finally started to feel some real independence and control over her life. My own childhood was the complete opposite. My parents, John and Mary, were the kind of people who worked hard and lived modestly. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. We lived in a simple, working-class neighborhood. My dad was a mechanic at a local garage, a job he'd had for over 30 years, and my mom worked at the bakery down the street, making donuts and pastries. They worked tirelessly to provide for me, always saving and cutting corners to make sure I had what I needed for school. They never complained or made me feel like I was a burden. Years later, after I finished college and got a good job, I managed to save up a decent amount of money. My biggest dream was to buy my parents a house, a small, cozy place in a quiet neighborhood. It was something they'd always wanted but never thought they'd have. When I finally did it and handed them the keys, my dad actually tried to turn it down. He said it was too much, that I shouldn't be spending my money on them. It took a lot of convincing and a lot of heartfelt pleading before he finally accepted. Both of them were in tears, and it was one of the happiest moments of my life. After that, my parents never asked me for anything, even though I often offered to help them out with money. They both took on small part-time jobs just to stay busy and have a bit of extra cash. They always said, with a quiet sense of pride, that parents should take care of their kids, not the other way around. It was just how they saw things. So, you can imagine how shocked I was when I first met Carol's parents. It felt like stepping into a totally different universe. My first meeting with Eleanor, Carol's mom, was especially awkward. We were at a restaurant. Carol had set up a dinner so we could meet. Eleanor looked me over and, without even saying hello, her first question was, "So, are you rich?" No small talk, no niceties, just straight to asking about my money. I stumbled through some answer about having a steady job and making enough to get by. From that point on, Eleanor became obsessed with digging into my finances. She'd ask all sorts of nosy questions, always steering the conversation back to money. She wanted to know about my insurance, my investments, my retirement savings. It was way too personal and made me really uncomfortable. I told Carol how I felt, and she did talk to her mom about it, asking her to stop. But Eleanor just got sneakier. She started asking me these questions when Carol wasn't around, catching me at family events or calling me directly. One time, I casually mentioned that I'd paid off my student loans, and Eleanor's face lit up. She went on and on about how I should be helping Carol pay off her debts, saying that since I was doing so well, it was my duty to help her out. Keep in mind, we were just dating at the time. It was such an over-the-line request, and it made me feel like she only saw me as a bank account. Eventually, I had to put my foot down and tell Eleanor that I wasn't comfortable discussing my finances with her, and that I needed her to respect my boundaries. But the requests for money didn't stop. They were just directed at Carol instead. Eleanor would call Carol constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, asking for cash. The amounts were always big, $1,000 here, $500 there. Every time it was the same story. Eleanor would call, often crying, saying there was some emergency. A medical bill, a car repair, some unexpected expense. Carol, being the good daughter, would feel bad but also explain that she was trying to save and couldn't keep giving away so much money. Eleanor would then lay on the guilt, reminding Carol of everything she'd done for her and promising to pay her back. But of course, that never happened. If Carol ever tried to bring up the money her mom owed her, Eleanor would explode. She'd scream at Carol, calling her ungrateful and selfish, saying she didn't appreciate everything her parents had done for her. Then, a few hours or a day later, Eleanor would call back, crying and apologizing, blaming her outburst on stress. But sure enough, a few days after that, the whole cycle would start over. Another call, another desperate plea for money. Carol would spend hours venting to me about these calls, going into every detail. But here's what drove me crazy. If I ever agreed with her or dared to criticize Eleanor's behavior, Carol would suddenly turn on me. She'd get defensive, saying things like, "I can complain about my mom, but you can't," or, "You don't understand our family." It was like she had this double standard where she could criticize her mom, but I wasn't allowed to. It didn't make sense, and it was exhausting to deal with. Eventually, I hit my limit. I told Carol, as kindly as I could, that I loved her, but I couldn't keep being her go-to person for these rants. It was too much for me, and it was starting to hurt our relationship. When we decided to get married, money became a big issue, no surprise there. Carol wanted a fancy, expensive wedding. I was okay with paying for it because I'd saved up and could afford it, but I also insisted on a prenuptial agreement. It wasn't that I didn't trust Carol. It was just being practical. After seeing how her family handled money, I wanted to make sure our marriage started on solid ground, with clear boundaries and financial security. Carol completely blew up when I brought up the idea of a prenup. She was really hurt and accused me of not trusting her, saying I was treating our marriage like some kind of business deal. She even threatened to cancel the wedding altogether, insisting that marriage should be about love and trust, not legal agreements and money. Eleanor, of course, jumped in and made things worse. She called me, yelling about how their family had honor and that I had no reason to worry about anything. That's when I finally snapped. I reminded Eleanor, pretty bluntly, that she had a habit of borrowing money from Carol and never paying it back, so her talk about family honor didn't mean much. Both Carol and Eleanor were furious. Carol packed her things and left our apartment, saying I'd insulted her family and didn't love her. I was heartbroken. I kept trying to explain that I wasn't doubting her or our relationship. I just wanted to protect both of us and make sure we started our marriage with clear expectations, without any future arguments about money. But she wouldn't listen. A week later, Carol showed up at my door out of the blue. She was in tears, saying she'd made a huge mistake. She told me that Eleanor and Richard had pressured her to start giving them her paychecks so they could manage her finances. That's when she realized how controlling they were. She agreed to the prenup and we got back together. The wedding plans moved forward. The wedding itself was something else. We had to invite Eleanor and Richard because it mattered to Carol, and I wanted her to be happy. But their reaction to how fancy the wedding was really stood out. They were clearly shocked by how over-the-top it all was, and it felt like a turning point in how they saw things. After the wedding, Eleanor started coming to me directly for money instead of just asking Carol. She'd call me, sometimes multiple times a week, asking me to pay for all sorts of things. Her hair appointments, dry cleaning, groceries, even just cash for no reason at all. I kept telling her I wasn't her personal ATM and that I wasn't responsible for her expenses, but she wouldn't let up. She'd guilt-trip me, saying she was old and had no one else to turn to, and that as Carol's husband, it was my duty to help her. At first, I gave in a few times just to avoid drama. I told myself it wasn't a big deal and that I could handle it. But then there was the refrigerator incident. Out of nowhere, Eleanor called and demanded I buy her a brand new stainless steel fridge with all the fancy features. I tried to reason with her, pointing out that her current fridge worked just fine and that she should ask Carol or Richard if she really needed help. But she just snapped back that I made good money and should be the one to pay for it. When I said no, she started crying on the phone, saying how disappointed she was in me and how I was failing as a husband. Then she called Carol and guilted her into thinking she had to buy the fridge if I wouldn't. Carol, who earns way less than me, was ready to dip into her savings to make it happen. To avoid the whole mess, I caved and bought the stupid fridge just to end the drama. Then there was the sweater situation. My parents had ordered these special, hand-knitted matching sweaters for Carol and me as an anniversary gift. My dad was so excited about them that he sent me pictures before they even arrived. When the package showed up, I hid it in the garage, planning to surprise Carol on our anniversary. On our anniversary, I went to the garage to grab a package, but it was gone. I looked everywhere, tearing the place apart, but it was just nowhere to be found. I asked Carol if she'd seen it or maybe accidentally tossed it out, thinking it was junk mail. She hadn't. The package had just disappeared. It was so confusing. A month later, I was at Eleanor and Richard's condo, and there, in their closet, were the sweaters, the handmade, personalized ones my parents had sent us. I confronted Eleanor, trying to keep my anger in check. At first, she denied it, then claimed she'd found the package near our trash cans. But after I kept pressing her, she finally admitted she'd been snooping around our garage, saw the package, and assumed I didn't want it, so she took it. It was such a lie, plain and simple theft. I was livid. I told her straight up that she had no right to go through our stuff and that she'd stolen from us. Her response blew my mind. She actually laughed it off, saying the sweaters were cheap and poorly made, and that she'd done me a favor by taking them. She even said I should be thankful. I told her they were a gift from my parents and meant a lot to me, but it didn't matter to her. She just didn't care. I took the sweaters back, and Carol and I left right away. On the way home, I thought Carol would be as mad as I was, but instead, she defended her mom. She said Eleanor probably just made a mistake, that I'd overreacted, and that I'd embarrassed her. She insisted Eleanor didn't mean any harm and was probably just confused. Couldn't believe it. Even after Eleanor was caught stealing, Carol was still making excuses for her. Then Eleanor called Carol, demanding she buy her a new dishwasher. It was such a ridiculous request. There were only 2 of them in the house and Richard was always out drinking at the bar. Carol tried to talk sense into her, pointing out how unnecessary it was, but Eleanor wouldn't budge. She said all her neighbors had dishwashers and she was embarrassed to be the only one without one. It was just unbelievable. When Carol kept saying no, Eleanor lashed out. She told Carol she wished she'd never been born, that any other child would be grateful to have such a generous mother, and that Carol was selfish and ungrateful. Carol was crushed. She spent the rest of the night crying. By this point, I'd stopped talking to Eleanor after the sweater incident, but the next day, she texted me. She said I should step up and help Carol out by buying the dishwasher for her. After emotionally abusing her own daughter, she had the nerve to demand I pay for the thing that started the whole mess. I didn't respond. I just couldn't deal with her. I showed Carol the text, hoping it would finally open her eyes to how toxic her mom was. But her reaction was, sadly, what I expected. She told me she'd already used a big chunk of her savings to order the dishwasher for Eleanor. She said she couldn't stand hearing her mother so upset. A few months later, Richard died tragically. He was found unconscious on the street near their condo after a night of heavy drinking. It was sudden and shocking. Eleanor was, of course, devastated, but things got even messier. It turned out Richard had racked up a ton of debt, including money owed to some shady characters, basically loan sharks. Eleanor was stuck with all these bills and even threats of violence if she didn't pay up. She had to sell almost everything they owned to cover the debts and was left with almost nothing. Carol and I talked it over, and despite everything that had happened, we agreed to take Eleanor in. She had nowhere else to go. Felt like the right thing to do, the decent thing. I thought maybe this could be a fresh start. Maybe with Richard gone and Eleanor in such a tough spot, she'd be more reasonable. I tried to make her feel welcome in our home. But then I started noticing things. Eleanor would go through our stuff when we weren't around or even just in another room. She'd rummage through drawers, closets, boxes, nothing obvious, but I'd notice little things out of place. Drawers not fully closed, boxes moved. I confronted her about it a few times, but she always had the same weak excuse. She was just curious, just looking around. I asked Carol to talk to her and set some boundaries, but Carol's response was always, just let it go. She's going through a hard time. It felt like my privacy was being constantly violated. Then, things started going missing. At first, it was small stuff, a decorative vase, some coasters, a few books. But then more valuable things began to disappear, like pieces of Carol's jewelry. What made it even stranger was that Eleanor would come home from her outings with shopping bags full of new clothes, shoes, and accessories. Given that she had no income, it became pretty clear she was selling our things to fund her shopping. She'd built herself a whole new wardrobe, complete with designer dresses and matching heels, even though she had no way to afford any of it. I brought this up to Carol as carefully as I could, sharing my growing suspicion that Eleanor was stealing from us. But Carol brushed it off. She told me to stop worrying about her mom and said Eleanor deserved to treat herself after everything she'd been through. I didn't have a problem with her treating herself in general, but not with our money, and definitely not by selling our stuff. It was stealing, plain and simple. The breaking point came with the incident involving my wallet. I came home early from work one day while Carol was still at the office. I went to our bedroom to take a shower like I always did. When I got out, I found Eleanor in our room, standing by my dresser, going through my wallet. I was stunned at first, then I yelled at her, demanding to know what she was doing and why she was in our room. She turned bright red, stuttering, and couldn't give me a straight answer. She looked like a kid caught red-handed. Later, when Carol got home, I told her what happened. I expected her to be as upset as I was, to finally see her mom's behavior for what it was. But instead, she downplayed it. She said Eleanor probably just needed some cash and that it wasn't a big deal. She even suggested it was okay for her mom to take money from my wallet if she needed it and that I should be more understanding. She accused me of looking down on her family and judging them because they weren't as well off as I was. She even implied that my upbringing made me less understanding, as if coming from a less privileged background somehow made me less compassionate. That comment really hurt. It was a cheap shot, and it showed a level of resentment I hadn't fully realized was there. I needed some space to clear my head, so I went for a long walk, trying to figure out why Carol was so blindly loyal to her mom, even when Eleanor was clearly in the wrong and stealing from us. It didn't make sense to me. When I got back home hours later, Carol apologized. She said she'd talked to Eleanor and told her not to go into our bedroom or touch our things anymore. I just nodded, but I didn't believe it would change anything. Eleanor had already shown she didn't care about boundaries or our property. And, sure enough, it didn't stop. I started taking steps to protect my stuff. I put locks on my dresser drawers, the living room cabinet, and even the storage boxes in the garage. It felt ridiculous to have to lock up my own things in my own home, but it was the only way I could feel somewhat secure. Then yesterday happened, the breaking point after months of feeling disrespected and violated. Carol called me at work, panicking. She'd gone home for lunch to check on Eleanor, but Eleanor was gone, and so were all her belongings. Her clothes, her personal items, everything. Carol started looking around the house and realized her credit card was missing, along with some of her jewelry, including valuable family heirlooms. Eleanor wasn't answering her phone, and Carol was terrified she'd use the credit card or pawn the jewelry. She begged me to help. To me, the obvious solution was to call the police and report the theft. But Carol got angry. She said she couldn't possibly report her own mother and accused me of not caring about her feelings. Now I'm just exhausted. I feel like I'm constantly fighting against Eleanor's selfishness and Carol's refusal to hold her accountable. Calling the police seemed like the logical, reasonable thing to do when someone steals from you. But Carol sees it as a betrayal. So, I'm left wondering, am I wrong for suggesting we involve the police? Isn't that what you're supposed to do in a situation like this? I really don't know what else to do. Update 1. Wow. I've been blown away by all the responses. Thank you so much for the support. I didn't expect so many people to chime in. A lot of you have pointed out how problematic Carol's behavior is, and I get it. I really do. The issue is, things are usually fine between us except when Eleanor is involved. It's becoming clearer and clearer that I need to have a serious talk with Carol about this. As long as Eleanor is part of our lives, this cycle of disrespect and Carol not setting boundaries is just going to keep happening. Update 2. I talked to Carol. I even showed her this post, hoping an outside perspective might help her see things differently. It didn't go well. She's really upset, saying the comments are unfair and judgmental. She got super defensive, arguing that anyone would help their parent no matter what. She also said she felt betrayed that I shared something so personal online. I tried to explain that I just wanted to figure out if calling the police was the right move, but she wasn't having it. She's putting all the blame on me and doesn't seem to see how Eleanor plays a part in this. Update 3. It's been a week, and Carol finally heard from Eleanor. Turns out, Eleanor pawned some of the stolen jewelry. She says she wants to be independent and is tired of living with us because she feels like we're holding her back. Carol threatened to call the police if the rest of the jewelry isn't returned, but Eleanor doesn't seem to care at all. Now, Carol's pushing me to step in and talk to Eleanor, but I told her I'm staying out of it. To my shock, Carol's now blaming me for Eleanor leaving, saying I made her feel unwelcome. I don't even know what to say anymore. Update 4. Some time has passed, and I've decided to file for divorce. I think a lot of you saw this coming, and honestly, I wish I'd realized it was necessary sooner. After Eleanor stole Carol's stuff, Carol did manage to block the credit card before too much damage was done, but we couldn't get the jewelry back. I suggested calling the police again, but she refused. Then she had the nerve to ask me to replace the stolen jewelry. Her logic. Since Eleanor stole it and I supposedly made Eleanor feel unwelcome, it was somehow my responsibility to buy new jewelry. All because she wouldn't call the cops. I said no. I told her I was done with her, her family, and this whole toxic mess. We got into a huge fight, and she said some really hurtful things about my parents. I told her to leave. She was shocked and accused me of being unfair. I told her to pack her things, and she left, cursing at me, and went to stay with Eleanor. Update 5. Since Carol left, both she and Eleanor have been blowing up my phone nonstop. Carol even reached out to my parents, which was a bold move. Luckily, my parents aren't like hers. My mom told Carol she trusts my judgment, even without knowing all the details. It's been a huge relief to have their support. I haven't told them everything yet, but I will soon. Today, I'm meeting with a lawyer to start the divorce process. I've already taken some of your advice and changed the locks. I've also ordered security cameras, which I'll be setting up this week. I don't know if Carol or Eleanor will try anything, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Update 6. It's been 2 months, and things have gotten worse. Eleanor was arrested. She's been stalking me, showing up at my job, popping up when I'm out with friends. It's been really stressful. One time, she threw a drink at me and ruined my shirt. I tried to stay calm, but she just kept escalating. She started coming to my house, even throwing rocks at my windows. Today, she went too far. She broke my bedroom window. I had no choice but to call the police. I couldn't take it anymore. Carol, of course, is furious. She says I should have handled it privately and that Eleanor is going through a tough time. I actually laughed at that. I told her Eleanor's actions have consequences. Now Carol's demanding I forgive Eleanor. After all the stalking, harassment, and property damage, forgiveness isn't happening. I finally opened up to my parents and told them everything. They were shocked I hadn't told them sooner, and they fully support my decision to divorce. I warned them to be careful, though I don't think Eleanor or Carol would go after them since they live pretty far away. Carol ended up bailing Eleanor out of jail. I made it clear to Carol that she's responsible for paying to fix my window, or I'd take legal action. Eventually, she and Eleanor caved and paid for the damages. Final update. The divorce is finally done. It's officially over, and honestly, it feels amazing. Like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I can breathe again. My ex-wife tried to go after spousal support and some of my assets, but the prenup I had in place did its job and protected me. She argued and begged, but it didn't work. To anyone thinking about getting married, I can't stress this enough. Get a prenup. I know it's not the most romantic conversation, but it's so important. It's about being smart and protecting yourself. And with that, this chapter of my life is closed for good. Onward and upward.